really quick, why don't we run down the panel, just give everyone a chance to introduce themselves just for a minute, and I guess in order, why don't we start with Igor at the end.
Hello. I started my career at IBM Microelectronics. Towards the end of it, there was a frustration since I think in '03, we had the framework for what became the Amazon Echo, and by '06, we had the framework for what would eventually become Watson, and I wanted it to move faster. So I ended up leaving, did a startup. Eventually, we got to about 50 million users, dozens of enterprise carrier customers, and then Google came after us, and we were secretly acquired by Amazon to make the things that are in 38% of American homes now. The thing that everybody said we were crazy, where we were in the back of cocktail parties speaking into this thing, and everybody thought that I needed to pop some sort of dementia pills.
Great. Sanjay.
Hi. I think I span kind of sort of the old AI and the new AI. I started out as an AI researcher at Xerox PARC. Partly based on that work, started a company called Predictika, which was sort of doing online pricing and configuration. We took it public in 2000. Last 10 years, I've been doing a lot of work in machine learning and so on, and my current company is focused on platform for conversational AI and chatbots, and we'll talk about it more.
And Ken.
Thanks. I'm Ken Dodelin, and I lead Capital One's conversational AI products. And so we have been heavily focused on the intelligent assistant space. We were the first bank to go on the Amazon Alexa platform in 2016, and the first bank to launch a natural language SMS chatbot in 2017. So before that, I've worked at a lot of media companies leading product development, and I also teach product development at Georgetown University.
Great, thank you. You don't really want to know about me since I'm one of those ivory tower people that can't do, so we teach instead. My PhD advisor many years ago had one key sort of rule for all of the students that he supervised. He'd like to say, every good theory should work in at least one case, right? And so if we think about conversational bots, if we think about you in the audience that are either thinking about trying to deploy, or rather trying to develop your own conversational bots, or perhaps take one of the platform solutions that might be available from some of the panelists, let's just say two to be a little bit more generous to my advisor, what are two motivating use cases for conversational bots? Igor, do you want to start?
Well, I don't like any of them. But I think it makes sense in terms of the way that they're getting constructed in order to maximize accuracy and have very specific tasks that you want to measure and just fling customers off of hitting your contact center. So that makes sense from the standpoint of reducing cost of the live human operators, and to get through a lot of the token, what I call sugar packet interactions that can bog down an organization and allow it to scale further. So that's contact center, of course, was going to be the most obvious place where that can displace and reduce things, and it tends to be one of the first gun sites that people have, as they tackle. And again, I'm more on the tech side. I'm not, on the consumer side. In terms of the enterprise side, I know Capital One's experience is going to be a lot, more relevant.
Mm-hmm. Sanjay?
So I think as Igor said, trying to provide a cost-effective replacement or an add-on to a contact center is obviously the classical case. But I also think that chatbots are appropriate pretty much for all the different stages in the enterprise lifecycle, from pre-sales to sales to post-sales support. So in that sense, I think any task that is being done that is spatially repetitive, I think is fair game for providing conversational solution there.
Okay, Ken?
Okay, so I think there are actually three jumping to mind. So I'll take one of Igor's since he passed one down to me. One, as he said, I think there's a navigational friction in any graphical user interface that a chatbot can help reduce, right? As we launch more and more features into a GUI, it can be harder for folks to find them, and so simply being able to ask, where is this thing, and get there, as he said, is low-hanging fruit. Similarly, not just navigational assistance, but just speed of getting you an answer. So if you were to ask, in our case, what's my balance, we don't think a chatbot should just say, well, if you go to this page, you can find it. It should probably just tell you. The third is probably the one that's more of a target for us, which is not just a Q&A bot, which, as Igor mentioned, is a nice way to deflect calls from your call center, but more about what can you put behind it to be proactive and integrate into folks' lives instead of just being something that's there when they're in trouble on a website, right? So from our standpoint, our intelligent assistant named Eno, we want to be, aspires to be the agent that helps you be better with your money. And so that's not just being reactive, but being proactive, thinking about your money when you're not, and reaching out to you with helpful suggestions.
Great, thanks, Ken. So given that we have a set of use cases that we can consider, as you in the audience think out there, here we are in Silicon Valley, and there's sort of an Eric Ries minimum viable product model of the world that says, let's start narrow. Let's take one of these use cases, perhaps what is my bank balance, and deploy a solution, and if it works, then I can begin to grow beyond that, right? So I'm going to get traction in the marketplace and then grow. Now, there are those who, and I'm going to stretch the limits of this metaphor a little bit, but if I'm working at Boeing and I think, oh, I'm going to pick one use case, let's think about taking off. I'm going to build the solution that nails down the takeoff, and I'm going to worry about landing later, right? So when we think about applications of artificial intelligence, when we think about chatbots in general, we could either think about developing a solution from a single use case and deploying it, or there's an argument that says, no, a successful chatbot solution needs to push in the Josh Tenenbaum direction. We need to address the general solution, right? A chatbot isn't going to succeed in the marketplace until and unless we can address a broad range of consumer-facing questions, right? So if I walk back down the panel, Ken, you're actually deploying these things in the field.
Yes.
What is your take on the start narrow and grow, or no, we need a general solution in order for it to succeed?
Well, we like to start narrow. First of all, the intelligence system we're building, of course, has the benefit of it's about money and not about everything in the world like some of the more general ones are. So that gives us a chance to go a little bit faster. I'll tell you a story about how we sort of backed into this. We launched a chatbot and had no idea, and many of your banks have as well, which is, you're probably familiar with getting the traditional bank fraud alert over SMS, right? It's, hey, there's a funny charge we saw, confirm or deny that this is yours. And what we found was, interestingly enough, 20% of the replies we got were neither confirm nor deny. We tried to train people to speak like machines, and surprise, it doesn't work. And so people were, either fat fingering, they were typing yes or no, or they were saying things like, oh yeah, that's the pair of shoes I bought in Philadelphia last week when I was visiting my aunt. And we didn't understand any of it. And so for us, launching a chatbot, that's about as, we already had an interface out there that people were trying to chat with us. It was just a matter of, hey, maybe we should put our natural language processing and our intelligent assistant behind this so that we can actually do what we're setting out to do in this channel. So that's an example, I guess, of you can go narrow and still put something in the market.
Right. Thanks. Sanjay, I know you have a platform solution.
So I think you have to look at what the original motivations were that got companies like Google and Facebook and so on were interested in, and Amazon putting so much effort behind chatbots. I think it is all about reducing friction. So if you look, 2015, 2016 was an interesting milestone where when people looked at where consumers' time is going on apps in a mobile device, that was a year when it turned out that messaging apps is where people are spending 50% or more time. So now the question is, you're a bank like Capital One, or you're a stockbroker like Schwab, or an insurance company, and you want your consumer to be able to talk to you. You're talking to your friend, then you have to go out of the messaging app, figure out an app, download the app, do something, then come back. And the reason why chatbots make sense is the businesses could have these autonomous agents inside this messaging program. So while you're talking to your friend, you could get a stock quote, you could go buy some shares, you could look at your stock balance, a fraud alert comes, you can find out what happened. All that interaction can be done. So I think when you're looking at what the scope is, you have to see what the natural sort of set of issues are that a consumer will be dealing with you on that for that business, and make sure that you put a reasonable envelope around that. Otherwise, if you say, I can solve problem A for you, but for problem B, go to my website, and from problem C, call my customer support, people are going to get very frustrated.
Right. So now we at least are beginning to set the boundaries of the space, right? We have narrow, we have at least addressing a broad enough range around the customer needs. Igor, where do you fall on this continuum?
Yeah, probably far in that corner, right? Which is, listen, when Watson, Alexa, and the rest of these things were conceived, let me start with what the vision was. It was, I want to know everything within less than 1 second. That's it. Very simple. And we're working backwards from that. I think the architectures that exist out there that a lot of people are leveraging to construct these things is not the appropriate one, so we're throwing everything out and starting from scratch because they won't support it. You have to understand, to your Boeing example, and I was thinking about it when I was looking out in the audience, all of you somehow drew to some conclusion that you would be sitting out in this audience, and yet you're all motivated differently in terms of how you got here, but you all arrived at the same place. In the case of the Boeing example, you don't need to program a landing. Eventually that machine, if it had the appropriate architecture, engine, and what have you, would figure out that it needs to land on its own. And here's why. I'm running out of fuel. What does that mean? These people that I'm carrying have these different goals, needing to go to different places. And so it would actually start making decisions for the landing. It's not something that you have to tell it and compel it any more than you tell a child not to do something, or we tell one of you that you have to be here. Whenever things are organically motivated to some sort of conclusion, and they can get to that on their own, that's the power of all the deep learning stuff and everything else. So I don't believe that you have to script the whole world. I hate that.
So if we think about whether we're going narrow, whether we're going broad, one of the realities, and in fact we heard an allusion to this in the previous panel, talks about the challenges of deploying solutions in domain-specific ways, right? Some of you in the audience drink soft drinks. Some of you in the audience drink sodas. Some of you in the audience drink pop. And if you're from Atlanta, it doesn't matter what flavor it is, you always drink a Coke, right? So the question would be, maybe if we start with Igor again, thinking about this general approach, how recognizing that regardless of how we slice it, there is a degree of domain specificity in the challenge to training these models. How do you collect data that observes, even in a narrow slice, to say nothing of a broad range, that respects some of these domain-specific constraints?
I don't want to respect any constraints, because from the example that you just used, right? And again, I'm just playing devil's advocate, not disrespecting exactly. In real life.
I'm offended.
No. How did you figure out that pop and soda were the same thing? Nobody had to train you. Nobody had to tell you. You one day you met somebody from Chicago that asked for a pop, and you saw him grab something, and you're like, oh, okay, that's what they meant. Or you heard somebody else ask for something else, or somebody else, I call it, we all call it different things. The point is, you didn't have to get trained on that form of interaction. And that's why I honestly think that these systems, as they don't observe context and other forms of observation and sensor fusion and everything else, are all full of crap. And I don't know why they have so many resources, although I do have an opinion why they haven't gotten to that. By the way, what you're doing in the bank is absolutely rational for what you guys need to do. But as far as Amazon, Google, and others, they're selling ads, they're selling books, they're selling devices. In the case of Apple, they don't really care. They need to drive the cost to zero. But all of these other approaches that we're talking about, they're going to take a longer time to cook, they're going to cost a lot more, and there's going to be other companies that are special purpose AI companies that are going to solve those problems that don't have the dead weight of supporting other types of businesses. And that's what you're going to see over the course of the next 5 years.
So as we think about those of you out in the audience, or those of the audience that want to deploy a conversational bot, in their application. So perhaps you're not interested in building your own chatbot, but you want to deploy one that already exists, perhaps to take one of the to adopt one of the solutions from one of the platforms. But recognizing that your domain may have some nuances, Sanjay, how would you advise those in the audience that might be your customers? How should they be thinking about the relative domain, the limitations or the capabilities to adapt a chatbot into the domain-specific constraints that they face?
So I'm not sure what Igor was advocating, so just to inject some controversy, I think what he seems to be suggesting is that somehow we'll have this machine that'll mystically learn. I mean, this whole thing about figuring out Coke versus diet, if someone didn't tell, if you're from Mars and you came to Earth and someone didn't tell you what a Coke is, you wouldn't know what a Coke is, right? So we all learn from observing, being told, we read, we try things don't work. So learning is a very, very complex process. So if you're going to build a chatbot and say, okay, I'm going to basically treat you like a 6-month-old baby and train you, well, good luck. I think that might happen someday. It's not going to happen today. So if you're going to build conversational agents, you have to give it enough domain knowledge for it to be intelligent enough to do something, and then over time, as you'll get more and more information, you can then learn from that and adapt from that. So I think there is no alternative to building a lot of domain knowledge for any application you build.
So Sanjay, I want to riff on that for just a second. I teach an entrepreneurial product design class at the business school at Berkeley. And one of the challenges that my students face, and they come to me all the time and they say, great, I want to deploy some of these technologies. I can read online about Amazon running 1% experiments. I don't even have one customer, let alone 1,000, let alone 1 million. How am I supposed to get the data to support your platform?
That's the question.
Yeah.
I think the data can come from lots of places. I mean, data can come from the customer itself. You need to find some early customer to work with. They'll give you the data. If you want the domain knowledge, actually websites are a very good source. I mean, a lot of companies put a lot of effort to put information about their products on the website. You can crawl. I mean, we have good crawling technology. You can crawl and you can get 70-80% accuracy as a starting point, and then you can go learn. You can learn from that, from new data going forward.
Mm-hmm. Ken, what about you guys?
I think I don't have a magic bullet for the person with one customer who needs lots of data. Fortunately, at Capital One, I don't have to worry about that. We have plenty of customers and a scaled audience to test with. Not to the scale of the Googles, but enough to do pretty well. For us, it's when we deploy something, it's extremely important that we have the right sensors of customer context involved, because every deployment is a learning opportunity. And so in the past, with our GUI-based products, it was just learning, okay, how can we optimize this, that, and the other thing, but now it's much more about how are we going to train the machine? How are we going to get enough cycles on this thing so that the machine can learn and come to a level of optimization that we wouldn't have otherwise? And so for us, it's both having the data to start off with to train it to a certain level. You can think of, in our case, just for like NLP, we might go chase live chat data so we can learn banking vocabulary and things like that. But then once in market, it's about, okay, how can we help people achieve certain goals based upon everything we know about them, and making sure we capture that along the way is extremely important.
I want to think about our audience for a second, and this audience includes some of our students as well. Let's start back to the very beginning where you said, look, once I'm in operation, there are these issues, but if I'm starting with the very first set of users, and Capital One already has an audience, how do you select the subset of customers that you test with? How do you think about your experiments to avoid pissing off a subset of your customers because they said, look, I asked 5 times, I just want to know the stupid balance, right? How do you think about what prescription would you give to the audience in how to think about selecting an available subset of customers in which to test from?
Is that for me?
Yep, for Ken.
Well, again, in our case, it's a matter of what is the range of the experience that can go out. When you're testing red versus green, it's not that important. But when you're materially altering the experience, and we're a highly regulated industry, right, and we take the responsibility of our customers and managing their money very seriously. So we will be a little more constrained than others, but we still find ways to alter the experience a little bit to learn on a step change sort of way. You can imagine we might be hesitant to use natural language generation, for example, in a Microsoft TiE type of deployment where it could say anything about your money and just learn from what it's getting from customers. But we might ring fence a little bit of the types of things it could go after with a customer so that the downside is appropriately constrained.
Mm-hmm. So Igor, if Ken came to you and said, listen, I would love to adopt your platform. I'm a little concerned with how well you've adapted for balance for kids that are, playing on the playground versus balance meaning my financial customers. What confidence, how would you deliver to Ken and convince Ken, how would you convince the members of the audience that in fact either A, that your product has been trained sufficiently in their domain, or else B, that you have a strategy for onboarding their domain into the platform? And if so, what's that strategy?
Right, so our strategy is option C. It's not the first thing, which is penning people down in one direction or another, and it's not the second in terms of training. It's all about context, right? And so there's plenty of context that's not getting taken advantage of that would help us understand what path to go to. I have to give them credit on their understanding of ethics when you do this A and B testing, because I can assure you that I'm sure you can take your balance to zero just to elicit some sort of emotional response to see how customers react to it, unlike some other dickish companies in this town that decide to mess with teenagers that way, for their testing. So take that on controversy. There is a sense of ethics when you're actually live fire interacting with users in terms of a line you should cross and a line you probably shouldn't.
So that's a great segue to the next question that I was interested in asking our panelists about. When we think about, and in fact, again, this is a segue, or this is a reference back to our keynote speaker who talked about taking these AI platforms and deploying solutions rather than thinking about them as technologies. So if we think about deploying solutions and we think about chatbots as an IO into a real solution, I had a conversation with a Southeast Asian airline earlier this spring where they were interested in deploying some analytics into they were talking about a failure that they had in deploying analytics into the workplace. They had a terrific solution for pre-positioning inventory and scheduling preventative maintenance on airplanes. And the problem that they had was they couldn't get their mechanics to use it, right? I saw this problem again with a retailer that we're actually doing research with at Berkeley. It's a vertically integrated fashion and apparel retailer. They own or franchise 700 locations around the world. They have a great scheduling program for the staff in these stores. And what they know is that more than 50% of their managers throw the schedule away and do it themselves by hand every week. So let's start with Sanjay. When you think about delivering solutions rather than just the chatbot interface, how do you counsel your customers in framing your chatbot as an overall solution?
I think that's a tough question in general, right? But I always look for what is a natural set of issues to solve for a particular customer, right? Now, I don't know about your scheduling issue. Sometimes I've dealt with scheduling problems in the past, and the challenge is that the reason why the automated solutions don't get used is that a lot of the scheduling constraints are not taken into account by the automated solution. The fact is, one person doesn't show up in the morning, and there is no way to then adjust it. So that's why the more and more of these kinds of problems happen, people say, okay, let's throw it away. I have to do replanning on my own anyway. So I think the solution that work are ones where you control enough of the world that you're going to solve 80%, 90% of the problem for the people you're targeting it for. If you can do that, I think that's a good start. If you find you're going to only solve a small piece and they have to keep running into something else, I think that's not going to be accepted.
Mm-hmm. Ken, in your teams, do you have technologists who focus on the learning the text, learning the domain, and another group that focuses on the customer? Or how do you tie those pieces together?
We are a fully integrated team. So we have marketing, tech, design, and product all together. And we start with each thing we're going to do with the customer problem and get all disciplines weighing in from the start. It's just a sort of a mindset we have at Capital One about how we approach products, and that's how we've been going. What's interesting, though, to you're kind of getting to is there's a dearth of talent in this space generally, but one of them that I find a lot is on the product side, product leaders who can have enough understanding of machine learning and the capabilities of AI to identify the opportunities. You can have the best folks in the world working on the tech or the data science side of it. You need folks who can channel that into things that produce great outcomes for customers and for the business. And so we continue to look for folks if any of you are interested.
Hire at Berkeley, sorry.
Sure.
Igor, what do you counsel to your customers in terms of thinking in solution space, and how would you counsel your customers, perhaps those in the audience, to take your solution and frame it around, to take your service and frame it around a problem solution?
Yeah, so I typically draw low expectations, which means, and obviously I'm sarcastic, you shoot for bliss and work backwards from it. Here's the problem. When you look at the sum total of all of us that worked in the industry over the last few decades, a small specialized group of us figured out how to talk like machines and instruct them and create algorithms and math and all of these types of things. We learn how to conform to the machine. And yet, if you take the sum total of all of the expenditures and all of the companies that you work with, to Workday, SAP, Salesforce, and all of these other systems, manufacturing execution systems and what have you, they only represent 1% of the data and applications necessary to operate these businesses, to the example that you used, right? The other 99% is trapped in human minds. That's it. That's the actual machinery of all of these companies, are the humans that actually perform the work. So if there's a fundamental disconnect between them and interfacing with the machines, now we have a blessing. We have a world with more networking, more computation, more this and more that, and we finally can get to turning the tables around and figuring out how to onboard those other 99% of users. And that's why we've always been massive proponents of these forms of natural interfaces that mimic biological interactions. And so that's the bar that we're setting for ourselves. And frankly speaking, you get it, right? Because you look down at your iPhones and your Androids and everything else, and you see a sea of applications that are what? Basically little domains with their own little authentication and all of these other things. Within the next 5 or 10 years, they're all going to disappear, and everybody's going to be smashing into each other and constructing a single unified AI assistant that can do everything.
So I think we're almost out of time. I want to ask one last question down the panel. Or I guess we have some people at the microphone. So why don't we, how much time do we have? Okay, so let's go with the microphone.
I had a similar question about how, at the very early stages as an entrepreneur, you could identify and get the right kind of data that you need at the early stages to make sure that the model that you're trying to build is going forward in terms of solving the question you're trying to answer. Let's say, for example, I don't know, you want to build something that can go and identify the right sort of music that you would like to hear. Before you even listen to music, it just knows what kind of music you would like to listen to because of other things that you've given it, what kind of music you like.
It's like a cold start?
That doesn't really exist right now, and I'm not trying to build that, but I'm just wondering, how would you be able to solve that problem of building a model sufficient to be competitive?
We all start in different ways, right? Bootstrapping, use previous work, collect data, and then just turn it over as you get more specific. That's the way that you could do it. Frankly speaking, nowadays with some of these methods, you don't even need any data. Just set it loose and see what happens. And hope that you have friendly customers that think whatever your end goal is, which is bliss, is something that they want. And they'll be patient and grow with you because they'll have some form of strategic advantage by working alongside you. But data's everywhere. I mean, the amount of open source knowledge that's out there I mean, if you can't construct, little spiders to go out and fetch things that approximate the types of interactions that you need in your thing, then your technical team has other problems.
Right. Let me go to the next question.
Hi, thank you. Very interesting perspective on the business and the solution, which is, we heard a lot. I would like to request you to share a little bit about your actual technology that you have built. Tell us a little bit about what kind of machine learning, what kind of algorithms or technology stack you're using, whatever detail. We saw the 6 layers. Whatever you would like to share, it'll be very helpful for us to understand how this is actually getting built in practical solutions, like places like Capital One or others. Thank you.
So why don't we start with Ken really fast? Just maybe just 2 comments on the stack and the technology. I want to have each person comment, and then we'll excuse the audience.
I'm going to be wholeheartedly disappointed in this response, but we just haven't gone public with how we've built the things yet.
Sure.
So
Perfect.
I'll defer to my tech partners when they're ready to go forward with it.
Fair. Sanjay?
So I think what I can tell you is what is non-proprietary. So we use Python libraries for NLP, machine learning, and so on, but we have a lot of our own proprietary algorithms. It's a longer discussion. This is not the right place to talk about it.
Yeah, Igor?
I plead the fifth.
Yeah.
But I will say this. I don't like the groupthink that clusters around these ideas where people say that they're building AI companies and all they are glorified applications on top of existing constructs. I think you've had a hint. We throw it all out and we start from scratch. Vertically integrate from chipsets on upwards. Highly optimized. I mean, optimization you don't do until step 2. Step 1 is get it working, model the whole thing, make sure it actually does the task that you want, and then eventually you optimize the hell out of it. But again, we're not think of it this way. There's certain companies that are going to take a fixation for doing certain things, and for us, it's going to be working on engines that don't exist yet. But I think it's going to have good utility. I also think that whatever people are doing in terms of constructing bots and different forms of AI assistance, it's not throwaway work. They're collecting valuable intelligence, valuable learning, and everything else. And so the future platforms that are getting born are going to take advantage of those things. They're not going to displace any of those things as well. So everybody's going in the right direction. Let's put it that way.
All right. I'm mindful of time to dismiss the audience. Please join me in thanking the panelists for making the time.